Welcome from myself as Dean Leadbeater as Chair of the Health Stats User Group, and thanks to all the speakers, and thank you also to the Royal Statistical Society for hosting and making this available. Just to say, we've got a new feature today, which is handing over the sharing of slides, which we haven't used before, so we hope that we actually get that right. But the plan is that we'll just run through all the presentations and have the Q&A at the end. So to start off with, a little bit of housekeeping, as is normal practice. If you can keep yourself muted and your screen not showing during the presentations. The questions that if you have any questions you want to pose or any comments, put them in the chat. There will be a full report, including of the Q&A, available, and also recording of the session. Presentations will be posted almost immediately after the webinar, and then the report will follow a little bit later, and then the recording usually in a couple of weeks' time. So there's a lot of opportunity for people to see it after the event. So including if you've actually got colleagues that can't make it today, and you can say that this is something you want to look at later. So that's sort of the housekeeping bit. So on to the main topic, which is the speakers and the content of today. It's slightly different from some of our usual webinars, in that we've, quite often we're on one particular aspect of statistics. So today it's not one particular aspect of statistics. We're looking at some aspects generally of quality, accessibility from the perspective of different users coming from different areas, and then thinking about how does the code of practice help with that. So that's the sort of focus. First of all, looking at things from different perspectives, and then saying, well, okay, does the code of practice help? How does the code of practice help? So actually, I mean, looking at the presentations that are coming up, I mean, I think in themselves, they're all really, really interesting, as well as hopefully helping to inform the development and the rolling out of the code of practice. So you will see that the speakers that we have, first of all, Deniz from RSS will be talking about stats under pressure, and then we'll move on to the view from local authority from Lisa, and then a user involved in research. We have Rachel Placzynski, and then after that a slightly different view, which is looking at pre-release access, another important aspect of access, and Jessica Shields from the Scottish Centre for Social Research will be talking on that. And then finally Penny Babb from the OSR, who's the sort of code of practice guru, will come back and say where we are with the release and moving forward, but also comment on what the speakers have said and how that's how that will maybe help in moving forward. So that's really all from me. So I will kind of hand over and to our first speaker, Deniz, and ask you to do the take control, which I think you have done.
Yes, thank you very much. I've taken control of the slides. So yes, I'm Deniz, Campaigns and Policy Manager here at the RSS, and today I'll be talking about one of our initiatives called Stats Under Pressure, Informing Decision Making at Pace. So just to kind of go through what I'll talk about today, I'll talk a bit about kind of the background and the aims of the initiative, what we did, and then focusing on the kind of case studies and the principles that we've developed, and then going on to next steps. And I guess at the end we can come back to any questions or comments or pop them in the chat. So a bit of background. Everyone may already know, but the RSS is a professional body for stats and data scientists, but also a charity, and that's kind of where this bit of work fits in, all about kind of advocating for the importance of stats and data and working to ensure that policy formulation and decision making are informed by evidence for the public good. So this came about kind of during the COVID-19 pandemic. We were hearing reports of challenges judging when data or stats were good enough to inform decisions and when trade-offs could appropriately be made. And the pandemic kind of highlighted the importance of data being able to inform decision-making at pace or under pressure. And this is important to ensure that evidence-informed decision-making and to avoid decisions being made in the absence of evidence if it's not deemed as kind of being perfect. So we began the project in 2023. aiming to foster an environment in which stats, data and modelling that are good enough to inform time pressure decisions can be used with confidence. And we were aiming to support a range of different kind of audiences and challenges in this space. So supporting statisticians and analysts with kind of when and how to make suitable trade-offs, thinking about broader awareness and the need, kind of highlighting the need for trade-offs in real world circumstances, thinking about the merits of this approach and kind of countering any backlash that there might be. And then also focusing on decision makers, kind of support with how to interpret data and analyses with uncertainty and limitations. So to take you through the kind of steps that we went through, we kind of talked to the community and heard quite a lot of interest that this kind of issue of balancing different trade-offs was resonating with quite a wide range of roles. We did a few surveys with our network to kind of explore the issues faced and help prioritise aims, and had conversations with a wide range of kind of RSS members, people across government and business and also academia. And then we formed a steering group to help us provide focus. So on the steering group, we've got John Aston, who's the current president of the RSS and has expertise in this space, and then also expertise from across the different kind of advisory groups of the RSS, and also people with first-hand experience of working on balancing trade-offs, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we came up with a set of different aims. These focused on deepening understanding on how trade-offs can be employed in line with good practice. So that's why this is relevant here, among statisticians and analysts. Also about improving the ability of non-analysts to interpret stats and data that are presented with uncertainties. One about kind of strengthening resources and structures, about cross-team communication, and also about raising awareness. And we also settled on kind of a main range of outputs to focus on. So we wanted to first focus on case studies to really kind of highlight what exactly we're talking about, what do we mean here, and then use these to form some principles in which the RSS supports or does not support making trade-offs. And these are the two that we've developed so far, and two that are kind of works in progress. So also thinking about some policy recommendations and some ways of working guidance that are, in the pipeline currently. So just to go into a bit more detail on the case studies and the principles. The case studies, the aim of these was to illustrate instances in which compromises were made in order for data to best inform decision making, kind of highlight what trade-offs were made, why these compromises were necessary to allow data to feed into decision making, and raise awareness, and then use this to feed into the principles. The aim of these was to deepen understanding on how to make trade-offs in line with good practice, and to support statisticians in kind of three main areas. So one with current work by kind of providing questions to consider. Another route is to reflect on or back up previous work, kind of statements to back up previous decisions, but also maybe support to say no, kind of to look back at these and say, actually, I can't do X, Y, Z, so it's probably not appropriate to be making these trade-offs in this instance. So the case studies we put together were in collaboration with contacts from across government and academia and industry, across kind of a range of topics, a range of different pressures and a range of different kind of statistical outputs. So COVID and not COVID, health, not health, different government departments, and kind of focusing on surveys, dashboards, randomized control trials and different outputs, and a range of different pressures and trade-offs. So some, well, most of them focused on time as an aspect, but also for some, the main focus was on quality or on public safety or on lack of resources. So we've so far published 8 case studies on a range of different topics. We've got one on homelessness and kind of harmonising homelessness data. We've got one on furlough statistics, the COVID-19 infection survey, badger culling, infectious disease and cattle health, quarterly regional DGP, whether to publish or pause, one on the Salisbury poisonings, on the COVID-19 dashboard, and then also on transport stats that were used during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I thought I would take you through just one of these case studies really quickly to give a flavour of what these are, but they're all available on our website. So the one I'm going through today is on COVID-19 furlough stats, developed with a contact at HMRC. So all of our case studies are kind of set out in the same way, same kind of formats. So first of all, laying out the problem. So this was a new scheme. There was immediate interest in it, but there was no prior reporting infrastructure that existed. So the team initially published high-level management info, first of all on Twitter and then on gov.uk, just about the number of people claiming and the total cost. And they then started the process to development to develop experimental stats release with more characteristics like age, sex, location. And this involved kind of taking information for businesses, and there were kind of challenges formatting, cleaning, missing info. There was a large scale of data and kind of things coming in different formats. So the main things they balanced here were kind of timeliness, providing some kind of timely real-time data, and then also on the other hand, kind of data completeness, quality assurance, comprehensiveness. So the impact of putting something out there in the first instance meant that these figures could inform public debate. It did mean that there were unanswered questions at first, but the team could then revise and add information. And it meant that the same story was out there, accessible for everyone, rather than kind of bits of information being gleaned by freedom of information request or by the media. So this was transparent and also saved time. So moving on to the principles, we looked across all of our case studies at the different factors that have been weighed up and also discussed with stakeholders from across the board, kind of thinking about how we could get to this space where something is sufficient quality for the intended purpose and is kind of good enough to inform results with confidence. So we've got 5 different principles. The first one is on understanding output purpose and stakeholder needs. So you've understood the purpose of the output and the needs of relevant stakeholders to ensure the output is proportionate and fit for purpose. The second one is on prioritisation of justification. You've considered the core aspects necessary for the output, linking back to its purpose, and have justified your choices and documented the reasons for these decisions. Thirdly, we've got one on risk mitigation. You have identified the possible risks and their impact, assessed the appetite for risk, and considered how to mitigate risk. Our fourth one is on transparent and accessible communication. So about communicating with relevant stakeholders, ensuring that they've understood the trade-offs, the limitations, and the uncertainty associated with the output, or communicated why it's not feasible to produce the output if that's relevant. And then finally, we've got one on monitoring and adapting. So where appropriate, about monitoring the output in terms of quality and reception, and considering adapting it to ensure it remains fit for purpose, especially in situations where things are changing on a rapid basis. So for each of these principles, we've got a set of kind of checklist questions to help people think through it. So for the first one on understanding purpose and stakeholder needs, there's kind of a range of questions, including who needs it and what for, is the output proportionate to the need? On prioritisation of justification, we've got questions about what the core minimum viable product is, and considering the pressures of time and resources, what's kind of necessary versus nice to have, what's the best way to spend time and resource to maximise the utility of the output, what's needed, and then importantly, if the output that's being requested isn't feasible, what alternatives could you offer? Thirdly, on risk mitigation, we've got, have you considered the short and long-term risks in the wider context? What's the risk appetite within the project? How to mitigate these, and have you kind of documented your justifications behind your decisions at every single step? On transparent and accessible communication, have you communicated with key stakeholders in a way that's appropriate to their needs? Have you kept stakeholders informed of progress? And have you made sure that everyone's aware of the trade-offs and the limitations that are involved? And then finally, on monitoring and adapting, are you monitoring the quality of the output and reflecting on the wider process as well, including the stakeholder engagement, the decision-making, the communication? Can you refine it as the context and demands change? And also kind of communicating the reason for that change as well. So those are our principles that are up on our website now. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we are developing a few further case studies just to have kind of a broad range of areas, to kind of have some in industry as well, maybe legal and education context too. We're also developing policy recommendations to encourage data to be able to feed into decision-making at pace, and also working on some ways of working guidance, building resilience into business as usual, and then also thinking about a kind of phase 2 of stats under pressure and where that might take us, whether that's focusing on AI or health or communicating uncertainty or misinformation. Still considering that. So that is the end. I think we'll come back to questions and comments later, but we're very interested in hearing kind of any comments on the work to date, but also what you guys would find useful in that context. So please do feel free to message or email or let us know. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Denise. I mean, a really fascinating and valuable project that, and obviously there's more to do on that. So look forward to discussion on that later. So we now move on to our next speaker, which is the view from the local authority, which is Elisa. So Elisa, can you are you going to take control and then move on to your presentation?
Hopefully I have. Let me just check. Yeah.
Oh yes,
yep.
wonderful.
Lovely.
So over to you, Elisa.
Thank you very much. So I'm Elisa Bullen, and I'm a Performance and Insight Manager in the Performance Research and Intelligence Unit at Manchester City Council. My team leads on understanding the Manchester's residents, delivering products that provide insight on their characteristics using quantitative and qualitative data. Our purpose is to ensure decision makers in Manchester have the evidence and intelligence they need to drive and shape strategic and operational thinking regarding our residents. Official statistics play a very important role in this, supporting local decision making, planning, funding, and accountability. Today, I want to talk about how the three pillars of the Statistics Code of Practice, value, quality, and trustworthiness, along with the three cross-cutting themes of coherence, collaboration, and transparency, are relevant to me in my day-to-day work as a local government officer and regular user of official statistics. First up, value. From my perspective, national level statistics are only useful as a comparator or when local authority level data aren't available. What we really need in local government are statistics that provide insight into our own communities, data that helps our senior leaders make informed decisions about where to allocate resources, what funding opportunities to pursue, and which strategic priorities will most benefit our residents. Examples of valuable data are ONS mid-year population estimates at ward level and projections, which can help us understand the size and structure of our local current population and future population. And census data adds depth to that understanding, giving us a clearer picture of the characteristics and needs of people across the city. Small univariate and multivariate census data are incredibly valuable, as the census is often the only comprehensive source of statistics that covers all ages at that level. Without local information, we risk misdirecting services, failing to meet the needs of our residents, and falling short of our corporate objective to deliver high quality, equitable services, an objective we're held accountable for by our councillors. And in today's climate, where we're working with fewer staff and tighter budgets, having access to reliable, relevant, and timely statistics is more important than ever. We want data we can use. If it isn't timely, comparable, and locally contextualized, it becomes useless. Next up, quality and trustworthiness. I've chosen to talk about these two pillars together because to me, they're deeply interconnected. As someone who relies heavily on external data being reliable, I use accredited sources like ONS, DWP, HMRC, PISA. Sometimes they're the only source of robust data, and in many cases, official statistics are expected to be used. The strength of using these organisations is that they carry weight, not just because of the coherence of the data they provide, but because of the reputation they've built for methodological rigour and expertise. Their statistics are produced by professionals who follow robust processes, which should give me confidence that the data are both accurate and reliable. That trust is essential, especially when the insights we draw from these data sets directly influence decisions that affect our residents and community. Being independently regulated by the OSR and having a statistics code of practice holds them to account and reinforces confidence in the statistics being produced. The code's emphasis on quality assurance and coherence gives local authorities who question these statistics confidence to challenge and collaborate with producers of official statistics. That's why I'm emphasising that top point again, that local statistics derived from accredited sources carry legitimacy with decision makers. They're seen as credible, reliable, and essential for informed action. But because official statistics are taken at face value, any inaccuracies can have serious consequences. This can lead to misjudging the volume, characteristics, and location of certain types of residents, resulting in underfunding, unmet needs, and a loss of public trust. Manchester has been collaborating with ONS for years about inconsistencies in estimating our population. Local intelligence has consistently pointed to a significant undercount, including in the 2021 census. While ONS has been receptive and willing to listen, it's frustrating that no apparent action is ever taken to reflect these concerns in official revisions, or at least to tell us why it hasn't been. We recognise the difficulties ONS face. We're just one of many users, and they need to balance lots of elements. But these are the challenges we have, and they have significant consequences. A growing amount of our analyst time is diverted to guiding stakeholders on data limitations, explaining why certain official statistics are unsuitable for informing funding and planning decisions in Manchester. Too often, we're forced to rely on heavily caveated statistics that we know aren't fit for purpose, either because we're required to use officially accredited data, or because we face an uphill battle trying to justify why our own estimates should be used instead, or because there are no other equivalent data available. We have to do a significant amount of work with our local stakeholders to ensure they know how and what to use in their decision making. However, we can't influence everyone, especially national decision makers and government departments, which is a massive financial risk. My last two slides will cover the cross-cutting themes in the Statistics Code of Practice and their importance. We're now firmly in the age of the armchair analyst, non-specialist users across local government who want quick answers and turn to AI tools to get them. The risk here is significant. These tools can generate convincing summaries, but without understanding the context, limitations, or caveats behind the data, there's a real danger of misinterpretation. And when decisions are made based on those misinterpretations, the consequences can be serious for our residents. Once again, analysts are being pulled away from delivering local insight to spend time coaching colleagues on how to ask better questions and take personal responsibility for fact-checking. This is why coherence, ensuring that statistics are consistent, comparable, and aligned across sources, with their uses and limitations clearly explained, is more important than ever. Without it, we're leaving too much room for error in a world where data are increasingly consumed without expert oversight. And the consequences of error will be borne by the residents of our city through misinformed decisions, inadequate services, and missed opportunities for support. I've included at the bottom of this slide a few examples of practical steps that I believe would help ensure statistics are used appropriately, aligned with the Code's principles of accessibility and clarity. I've added not as links in brackets here because there seems to be a trend of embedding links within publications that lead to another page, which then links to another, and before long you've completely lost track of what you were originally trying to understand. It's overwhelming for the reader. It is for me anyway. To conclude, as users of official statistics in local government, we need data that are focused on relevance, reliability, and usability, not just availability. Users like me need granular, actionable data, not sacrificing substance over style. We need raw data more than flashy dashboards and dynamic, innovative visuals. Producers of official statistics are engaging and listening more, so they have a better understanding of what users need. And the Statistics Code of Practice gives us a strong foundation through its pillars of value, quality, and trustworthiness, and its cross-cutting themes of coherence, collaboration, and transparency for this to continue. But we need collaboration that counts. For the code to truly deliver, it must be lived out in practice, not just referenced in principle. It's not enough to tell us about the data and collect feedback. We need to see more local area experts meeting with national methodological experts, having real matrix managed project teams where people can honestly and safely problem solve. But this will only be of value if data providers trust and act on what users are telling them about their local areas. Data providers who receive local insights should ensure individual contributors understand how their input has influenced or not influenced the resulting data about their area. This transparency helps avoid uncertainty about whether their contributions actually made a difference and were worthwhile, because we can't invest significant time contributing if no meaningful change follows, without us understanding why. We need clear feedback loops in place so contributors understand that their input is valued. Without that, trust that our input is valued will erode and collaboration will start to feel one-sided. We need meaningful partnerships built on trust and respect, based on an understanding that we have a shared goal in using the best high-quality, valuable data with no hidden agenda. And producers of official statistics need to understand how their data are being used and relied on by a broader range of users than government, to understand where it falls short and what gaps or issues need to be addressed. There also needs to be greater awareness among data providers about how official statistics are being misused in practice and how they can reach these users with guidance and clear communication about the complexity of interpreting data. This includes central government, who use official stats de facto for decisions about local government with little challenge, contextualising or conversation. When these principles are applied with purpose, we don't just get better statistics, we get better decisions, better services, and better outcomes for the people we serve. And that's me finished. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Elisa. You raised some really, really important issues there, which I mean, hopefully we can talk in the chat, but I think we can take forward in further discussions. There's a lot there that needs to be addressed and discussed further. So thank you for summarising it in such a clear and succinct way. So thank you very much. So we now move on to once again another slightly different perspective, the perspective of a user involved in research, Rachel Brzezinski. So Rachel, you've taken control now, hopefully. Over to you.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for inviting me. It's as a non-statistician, it's still always really nice to talk to statistics people. It's a fascinating subject. So yeah, and I deliberately called this part of the presentation. It's about expert lay users versus novice lay users. So I am very much an expert lay representative within health research, and I work with a lot of other expert users. But then I'm often spending quite a lot of time talking to people who know little or nothing about patient and public involvement, never mind actual data. So I think that range has to be acknowledged. So moving on, this is who I am, by the way. I've been involved in maternity and service improvement since I had my own babies. I think that photo was taken, I have to stop and think, when was my youngest child born? 1996. And the lower picture, as you can see, they're all adults now. They're at a friend's wedding. Yeah, so I was a journalist. I had my babies. I got involved with the National Childbirth Trust. I trained with them as an antenatal teacher and joined their research network, and then got increasingly drawn into the research side of work. And on top of that, I went to university after I'd done all that NCT training, ending with a master's degree in psychological approach to health. I did do a lot of stats at the time. I did really enjoy it, but I haven't used SPSS since 2008. So I'm always very pleased when I join a project if there's a lovely, approachable statistician who will explain things to me in simple words. I also, I'm breastfeeding peer supporter as well now. I don't do the antenatal teaching anymore. And I've been involved with my local Maternity Voices Partnership, which is a co-production group looking at parent feedback and thinking about how things can be improved. I say I've been working freelancing PPI since 2019, and I was one of the original members of HDI UK's Public Advisory Board. And I should have said I was also involved with Cochrane executive for quite a long time, and those are some of the data intensive projects that I've been involved with, although I did actually start in trials, but then I've got more and more involved in data intensive research because I do think it's a really interesting area to work in from a patient and public involvement point of view. So yeah, when I'm talking, I say I spend a lot of time trying to explain to people what my job is, because if I say PPI, nobody knows what I mean. And I constantly come across these really competing perspectives, this huge range of takes on both research, but particularly on data intensive research. When I start to explain about big data sets, health data in particular, but also routine data, it's often a real eye-opener for people, but you do get this real range of takes on it. So a lot of people are interested, especially people who are a bit geeky like me, and they're the ones I often target as, oh, they'd be a good person to get involved in one of my PPI groups in future. There's a lot of excitement from certain groups, particularly around the potential for improving health, and that's usually people who have long-term health conditions and a lot of interactions with health services. Not all of them, by the way, some of them are deeply sceptical, but certainly that excitement is much more prevalent in that group than it is in people who have had little or no involvement with healthcare. There are people who are just overwhelmed. They just say it's too much, I don't want to think about it. Just yeah, whatever, deal with it, I don't care. I still come across people who are annoyed, often because of other data approaches. So I spoke to a local businessman when I was preparing this presentation to say, I'm talking about statistics, what do you think? And he just went, tell them to leave me alone. Because one of his staff had once responded to an ONS survey, and so he kept getting loads more requests for data, and he branded all data with the same label and decided he didn't want to have anything to do with it at all. People just then start to rant at me about how they've said something in a survey, but nobody does anything about it. And I also deal with people who are overly optimistic. They're quite excited about the potential for data and statistics to, throw things up and identify issues, but they'll also start to say things like, well, we wanted a definitive answer. We want to know how many people are going to be, how many women in particular during pregnancy are likely to be affected by this condition. And it's like, well, it all depends on, diet, exercise, population change over time, distance they have to travel to hospital and so on. So trying to say to people, well, we can't actually give you that definitive an answer is sometimes quite discouraging to them. And also the example in particular is gestational diabetes. I mean, 20 or 30 years ago, I don't think anybody had any idea the sheer number of women now are affected by gestational diabetes, and that affects their pregnancy, their birth choices, their recovery from birth, and so on. It just wasn't there. We just didn't know about it. So yeah, that's a thing we have to deal with. So when it came to talking about this, and I sat and thought about it and read a bit of the information I'm being given, and I did think, yeah, I need to go and talk to more people other than just the people I normally are interacting with who do understand about research to some extent and about statistics and some of the limitations. So this is the little prompt that I wrote to myself, and off I trotted. So yeah, I did email some of my PPI colleagues and friends. I discussed this at a Maternity Voices partnership meeting. So I had both women representing other women and health professionals there. I put something on a Facebook group that I run with Elder Mitchell from the University of Nottingham, where we talked to parents about research on that and got some of their input. And I also propped at the Bar's 40th birthday party last weekend and got to talk to an architect, someone who works with a lot of machinery. Well, no, two people who work with a lot of machinery who were actually really insightful and really, really helpful. So it's their input that I'm putting together when I'm talking about this. And I've split their sort of feedback into those three themes. But as you'll see, a lot of them overlap and sort of feed into one another. And we'll see how we go from there. So yeah, trustworthiness, this came up. And I have to say, this was my first response was, do we talk enough to people about the limitations of health data and data research? I would say an awful lot of the people I speak to generally, they have no idea about difference in methodology. If you say health data research, the first thing they'll say is lies, damned lies, and statistics. And yet, something about getting methodology into the population more generally, so they can start to understand about how research is conducted by all these different means and the strengths and weaknesses. I'm not quite sure how it does. And then the next thing that often comes up if I manage to get across the idea of epidemiology and population level questions and research is, well, how well does it reflect who we think we are? So this map I've included here is of my local authority, which is called Kirklees. Kirklees was created in 1974 as part of the local government reorganisation. But even though it's been there for all those years, what is that, nearly 40 years, 50 years? It's not a local authority that I think any of the residents actually identify with. It's very much cobbled together. So those top four areas, that's North Kirklees, that's where I live. Those are the town councils at the time, and everybody in North Kirklees feels takes all the money. I believe that most of the people in South Kirklees think that North Kirklees takes all the money, and to add insult to injury, Kirklees, which we're named after, nobody ever knows what it is actually in that little tiny gap there between Huddersfield and the Spen Valley. It's not actually in Kirklees at all. So yeah, it's not something we identify with in any way, shape or form. However, when I started to talk about data, and I talked about it to one of my neighbours who's 80, Joyce, wonderful woman. She was one of the women that got angry on behalf of one of her friends who had gone to complete a DBS check online. And when she was asked about her place of birth, she typed in Dewsbury. Dewsbury's had a hospital for a very, very long time, and she's very much a Dewsbury woman. And the system wouldn't accept her place of birth. And finally, she worked out that it would only accept Kirklees. And she was just so angry about that, was Joyce, on behalf of her friend, because she said, we're not from Kirklees, we're from Dewsbury. Kirklees means nothing to us. In fact, you know, the people who live in North Kirklees, they rarely go into the bottom end of South Kirklees. They just don't see it as the same people at all. So there's always this issue of, you know, does it reflect who we are? The other issue that comes up regularly when we're doing the research is ethnicity classifications, that they're just, you know, if you talk to anybody who's not white British, they instantly say, well, that's really crude. And I don't see how saying that, you know, black women are 5 times more likely to die is helping me. It's not helping me as an individual. It's not acknowledging who I am. People who are South Asian will say, well, South Asia is very big. Sri Lanka is very different to Bangladesh, and even locally to me, we have a large South Asian population in North Kirklees. Apparently, when the mill owners went out recruiting people to work in the mills in the 60s, 50s and 60s, for some reason, we ended up with mainly people from India went to work in Batley and people from Pakistan went to work in Dewsbury, and those divisions still to some extent exist. So, and people will say, well, you know, well, what if I'm black British but I'm born abroad? Does that make a difference? You know, if I'm white British and I was born abroad, and my education, all these things, they want to see their individuality reflected before they're prepared to trust a kind of a data study, if you like. You know, does it recognise the individual differences? And then the other thing that came up when we talked about the MVP meeting was it's about the interests and the conceptions within different communities about things like maternity. Is the data that we're using and reporting on picking up on that and what's missing? And someone did say specifically, could you tell me more about what's meant by the term cherry picking? Really? Do statisticians do that? I didn't think they'd do that, really. And there was often this general element of, when we looked at these things in the code, people go, well, yes, of course. Doesn't everyone do that? And we had to say, well, no, sometimes, because people get caught up in their own concerns or their pressures and so on. And they don't necessarily deliver everything that we think they should. But yeah, certainly the ethnicity classification is a big issue for an awful lot of people, as well as that sense of place, where you come from, where you identify with, and the fact that in an awful lot of areas still in the UK, people are very, very parochial. There are people who live in my area who consider that moving 4 miles away is moving away from your family. It's a break from your family. It's that much that their interests are quite small. So yeah, I will come back to that further on as well. And we talked a bit about quality. You know, that what does quality mean to people? And they kept saying again, you know, does it reflect the interests of different communities? And I kept thinking, well, yeah, we are different communities, we are individuals, but at the same time, how does data help us feel like a whole population, that we all have something in common? Because one of the other things about the area that I come from is that Joe Cox, the Labour MP, who was killed shortly before the Brexit referendum, that happened 3 or 4 miles down the road from me. and that's where the more in common movement started. So and there are some real good moves in Batley actually to be more open, I would say, to people and more accepting of people, but it's certainly not always the case in Dewsbury, unfortunately. So you know, how can data help us do this? We want to have that individually recognised, but we also can. What is our common? What's common to all of us? What do we have in common as a nation, as an area, and so on? And we kept going back to this dynamic and evolving thing, because it sounds really good. Because one of the things I'm always coming up with on when we talk about data research is my PPI group will flag something up, and if it's a data intensive project, we quite often have to say no. We can't do that because we don't have over-the-counter medication data. We don't have this, we don't have that. It's not in these common data sets. One of the really big ones within maternity has been the transgender debate. It's been a very vigorous, at times ugly debate. It's come up within PPI with people saying, you know, we need to make sure that people who are transgender are represented in this data and so on. And we've had to say, well, actually, no, because again, the data isn't there. This is something that, and regardless of whether people agree with it or disagree with it, if it's something that people are doing, how are we capturing that? And who are the people who are noticing things that, you know, that there is this change happening in how people are living their lives, and then starting to put into place the coding, and then starting to make sure that people are recording it accurately so that it can actually make its way through. I mean, I'd love it if somebody would give me an estimate of how long, is there an ideal of how long that should take from noticing to actually making it into an official statistic? Really difficult to think about, but it's something that needs to happen. You know, otherwise data's always a bit too far behind the curve. So yeah, just knowing how that could be implemented would be really helpful, I think, to many of us talking to people about you know, data and health and how their lives. And then coming back to sort of the not quite as parochial as talking about Dewsbury and Batley, but when we talk about value, people were talking to me about, you know, oh, well, who can use these statistics? One of the really happy things to happen at the 40th birthday party was that an architect actually said, oh yeah, I read ONS regularly to keep up on all the building statistics and the construction industry. Which is like, well, hey, there's a win, actually. Really good to talk to them. But yeah, how is what we're producing useful to individuals? You know, and when we're producing, you know, when we're giving them a statistic, what other factors do they need to consider to think about what that, you know, we can say, well, this is more likely to happen, but then we're saying, I need to think about this and this and this. And what use are your statistics to other organisations? Are all regions represented in the data that's being used to answer a particular question? And this is where I do have a really eye-opening example, which is, you know, I was talking to a group of researchers. We had a really interesting paper that we were looking at about 6-week checks for women who'd recently had a baby. And there was a national paper out which had used CPRD Gold, because CPRD Gold is apparently seen as broadly representative of the UK population. So we're reading this, we're already interested in maternity, we were very interested in the ethnicity differences that were coming out of that analysis. And then when we got to the end, and you know, you start to read the bit about some of the possible weaknesses of this paper, and it actually said Yorkshire and the Humber is not represented in this paper, which kind of caused me to take a step back, given that, you know, we do have a pretty diverse population here in the Yorkshire and the Humber, and yet that hadn't made it into that national data set. And after asking questions, it turns out that most of the primary care data in Yorkshire and the Humber goes into +1 rather than CPRD. And that's not as commonly used by researchers wanting to get a national picture of an issue. So, and when I talk about this at my MVP meetings, everybody's really shocked. When I've talked about it to Locala, the CIC that delivers an awful lot of our community-based health services, they were really shocked, because again, they're saying, well, we're collecting all this data, but you're telling me it's not coming up in a national picture. So it's like, yeah, who do we talk to? Who do we talk to flag up those sort of things? We're saying, well, yeah, you're doing some great research with the data that you have, but it's missing things, so I can't actually apply it to my region. We could be doing great things in Yorkshire and the Humber with meeting the needs of women from South Asian backgrounds on 6-week checks, but it's not there in that data set. So we'd have to go away and do something totally separate to try and find out what was happening. So yeah, that is a big concern that it regularly comes up. On presentation issues, which I did notice is also under value, people were really interested in this. They did say things like, well, yeah, pie charts are lovely. Give us pie charts. We can understand the pie chart. Or icon arrays. Not many people use the word icon arrays, but some of the more experienced service users said they were really useful. And I know I've used them in when I used to teach antenatal classes to explain some issues. They really got things across to people really well. But yeah, they need to be more accessible. Graphs often aren't. You know, even as quite an experienced research reader, I quite frequently find myself looking at a graph and then I have to go away from it, and then I go back and look at it again. And even then I can't always make sense of some of the more technical graphs that are brought out in official publications. People really struggle with percentages and ratios, and trying to think how you use that data to counter anecdotes. You know, well, it's all very well saying that, you know, smoking is dangerous, but my granddad smoked every day and he lived till he was 86. We're still having to deal with a lot of that, which I'm sure you've all heard, but it is tricky. When you're reporting on your data, it's just to say, please be really careful when. I think of headline words. As a former journalist, I think there are certain words which are headline words. You work them into your headline. You don't use and, but, if, just in case, maybe. You use death, vaccination. You know, you use the really hard-hitting words. And even in a full piece of work, those are the ones that a lot of people will home in on. You know, I know I've sat in meetings and had email trails where we spent hours trying to communicate nuance around, you know, some health finding. And then I remember during lockdown on one of the local Facebook groups, a woman had got hold of the Yellow Book report on COVID vaccination just after the vaccination programme had started. And she could not or would not accept that there was a difference between deaths following vaccination and deaths caused by vaccination. So yeah, in some ways she'd already made her mind up, but I could easily see that a lot of people just wouldn't see that difference. And even if they did, they'd have to stop and think about that and work it out and then start talking to other people about it. So yeah, the headline words they're quite a tricky one, but they're ones that we have to try and avoid in some way at the same time as getting our really key points across and trying to catch people's eye. So, oh yeah, and one very experienced service user colleague did say to me, with something of a weary sigh, I have to say, please remind people about NICE guidance NG 197 on shared decision making, because it does include some really good information on how you communicate numerical information, and that quite often people just don't, or they report half of it, or they don't. It's there, it's useful. It's a useful thing to link to directly to it, or just to include a snapshot. But I think it's a really useful thing to use in things like a code of practice. There's good stuff there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Have a find that. And then finally, some points that came up that as far as I could see, weren't included in my brief read of the code of practice. And these did come from service user representatives who are more experienced in that. And they talked about, you know, well, what about accountability? If somebody's, you know, who is named on each project, who takes responsibility for those conclusions? Is it the first author? Is it the final author? Because people who are outside the research world do not understand anything about, you know, the importance of ordering of names at the top of a paper or a report. It just doesn't happen. Who takes responsibility for that? And if it's wrong, who? You know, what about whistleblowing? As experienced service user representatives, if we think people are absolutely mucking up the stats, they're cherry picking, they're fudging, they're ignoring something key, where do people go? If we think that's unrepresentative, where do we go? Because again, we don't really know. What do we say? What do we do? What's the process? You know, how long is it like to take before things are corrected? Would be useful to know. And this is a direct quote from a colleague of mine who, she does a lot of work with teenage parents, having been a teen mum herself. And it's this issue, yeah, it's a code of practice, yeah, it should ensure statistical rigor, but it's also, it needs to help bridge that gap between your technical expertise and our public understanding if you want to gain trust. One of the things about good PPI, I feel, is it's like a mini university education for people. It really lifts people up. It shows them how to engage with data and other people. It opens all kinds of avenues for people, things if it's done really well. And I know a lot of people who are maybe statisticians just say, well, I like doing the stats, but maybe I don't like talking to people that much. But there are people who can help you do that and support you to do that. You know, you are educating people all the time when you engage with the public, and most people do want to hear from you if you can just learn how to get through those initial emotional anger, upset, fury, despair, over optimism. We can work through that and you can get there. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and I'll look forward to answering your questions later.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So many issues there, and it's actually really great to have that kind of actual view from the people on the ground. I mean, so often there's a survey and all you get is the sort of the usual suspects responding to that, but to find out what people really think and really feel about it and how they use it, it's really very, very important. So thank you so much for that. Hopefully that will generate some useful discussion later on. So now we're handing over to a slightly different aspect of accessing, which is the pre-release access, and over to Jessica, who has hopefully now taken control to move on to your slides.
I have indeed. Thank you so much. So I'm Jessica Shields. I am a research director at the Scottish Centre for Social Research. So if you don't know us, we're part of the National Centre for Scottish Research, the Scottish arm of that. You might know us because of some of the large-scale surveys that we do, particularly the Scottish Health Survey, the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey. But we've also got a more mixed methods policy team as well, and that's the team that I work with, and we do research on a whole range of different topics around health. A lot of my own work is on mental health. We do a lot on benefit reform, around education, and we do quite a lot on health behaviours, the impact of marketing. I myself do a lot on young people and vaping at the moment, so we cover a wide range of topics. So we have been commissioned by the Scottish Government, by the Office of the Chief Statistician at the Scottish Government, to conduct a review of pre-release access for them. And unfortunately today I can't tell you anything that review says, because it is ongoing, and I know that's a really, really interesting bit for you, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions about, what have people said about this, what are you going to recommend? And I'm afraid I can't tell you any of that today, but I can tell you at the end when you will be able to find out all of that. But for those of you who aren't aware of pre-release access to statistics, it is a relatively common practice of making official statistics available to specific actors in government before they're released to the public. So this can include ministers, special advisors, people working in policy, people working in comms, and it is a tightly defined list of those people who are really involved in that policy area, that topic area. In Scotland, some people working in the Scottish Government and some people as well out with the Scottish Government can have access to certain types of statistics for up to 5 days before they are released to the public. And then for other types of statistics, so things like GDP or Scottish retail sales, ones which are seen as conferring a market advantage if somebody had them early, there is no pre-release access to them, so nobody sees them until they are published, apart from the statisticians who are working on them. And then for ones which are deemed somewhat market sensitive or economic, these pre-release access for them is only allowed up to 24 hours before their release. That is a bit of a different setup in Scotland as to other places in the UK. So Wales also retains 5 days of pre-release access. The ONS relatively recently removed pre-release access for all of the statistics that it produces. And in the UK government and in Northern Ireland, some people within the government can have pre-release access up to 24 hours in advance of publication. So yeah, some disparities across the UK in the different arrangements. And this disparity was highlighted in a recent report, well, less recent and then recently updated by Professor Deniz Gursul, who looked at the UK Statistics Authority as a whole, but some of her findings and recommendations were around this inconsistency across some of the devolved governments in Scotland. So her recommendation was that the inconsistent application of pre-release to official statistics across the UK statistical system potentially could be undermining public trust in statistics. And she suggested that the secondary legislation for each nation should be amended to follow the pre-release access approach taken by the ONS in line with the Code of Practice. So the ONS has no pre-release access. So yeah, for then the Scottish Government, we were commissioned to review their use of pre-release access from a couple of different angles. So they had previously committed to evaluate their internal changes for those economic and market sensitive statistics. So that had been 5 days, the same as other statistics of the Scottish Government, and has been reduced gradually over to that period of 24 hours for some of those, and then none for things like GDP. And then, so that they had already committed to evaluate that element, and then in the context of the Leavesley review, they decided to broaden the scope of the review to look at the use of pre-release access in general in the Scottish Government, and to consider some possible options for that. We've got some really detailed research questions, so thinking about what are the trends and patterns in public trust in official statistics in Scotland, what have been some of the drivers behind the changes that have been brought in other parts of the UK, what have stakeholders' experiences, so I'll explain a little bit what I mean by stakeholders in a little second, but what's been their experience of those changes, that reduction from 5 days down for economic and market sensitive statistics. How is PRA being used? How is pre-release access being used currently within Scotland? What do people see as the benefits? What do people see as the challenges of it? And what do they think about the impact that that has on stakeholders and on the public in terms of their trust in statistics? And then considering some of the ways that pre-release access arrangements could change, what would be the impact of those? What would be some of the benefits? What would be some of the challenges? So we've got a 4-phase methodology to initially do some desk-based research, some scoping work, finding out kind of what are some of the drivers behind, what are some of the patterns in public trust, and we're looking at data from ONS and the PCOS surveys to kind of get at some of the trends in public trust. Looking at some of the published literature, there have been various reviews around pre-release access and various literature that relates to the drivers for that. And our second phase then was to undertake interviews and focus groups with people who use pre-release access within Scotland. So those were people from ministerial offices and special advisors, people who produce the statistics, so both within Scottish Government and then other public bodies as well. So we've got a lot of other organisations, other bodies that collate and produce the statistics, which are then released. People who are working in press and comms who use pre-release access in that way, and policy officers as well, working across a range of topics. We've also convened an online discussion group with members of the public, and they were, we selected that group on the basis of some of the findings from the desk-based research, those the data on public trust, and it was those who generally public trust varied by kind of job role and housing tenure were two of the ones that were coming out strongest. So we made sure to sample from those groups. And we are currently in phase 4. So we are developing the options paper for the Scottish Government at the moment. Once that's been delivered, we'll hold a seminar with the Office of the Chief Statistician to think through some of the kind of practical implications of the options that are being put forward. And then that'll be, the final draft will be delivered to them towards the end, I think it's towards the end of August. So I appreciate that's a very, here's what we're doing. I'm sorry, I can't tell you what's coming out of it. It has been very, very interesting. Our fieldwork is complete. The option seminar is scheduled for the end of August. There's also the ScotStat board, and they review the use of official statistics in Scotland. They are doing a concurrent review of pre-release access, and our review will feed into theirs. Scottish Government commits to publishing all of its commissioned work, so our review will be published towards the end of the summer, so hopefully towards the end of September. So it will be there, and you can read all about what some of the findings were for us coming out of it. So watch this space, and thank you.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, in terms of watch this space, we can, of course, if you let us know when something's available, we can then post it as a sort of further comment on the material from the webinar, and make sure people know that when that's available. So
great, thank you.
We can always follow up. This is, you know, this is not just for now. We do follow up with a lot of the material after webinars. So thank you very much. So now we sort of hand on to our final speaker, Penny, who's hopefully taking control of the slides. And Penny, you did ask for comments and issues, and you've had quite a lot thrown at you. So be interested in your thoughts on how the code of practice might fit in, and I mean, quite interested in terms of whether some of the problems are because it's not within the code of practice, or because people are not following the code of practice, or how does it all fit into some of these things that have been raised. Anyway, over to you, Penny.
Thank you so much, Nina, and to the other presenters. What a fascinating session it has been. It is going to be, I think, be a really useful resource for stats producers to actually look back at and to really think through some of those challenging points that each of the speakers has been raising. I did kind of note a couple of things from the presentations, which I just like to kind of mention, because how they kind of connect with our thinking in the Office for Stats Regulation and where we're moving with the code of practice. I think the work that Deniz picked up on right at the beginning, stats under pressure, that work has been incredibly useful in providing a collaboration. Not least, I think collaboration is one of the words that I've picked up through the session today. That bringing together the different range of expertise from different sectors, reflecting on particular intensity of experience that you get when you are working almost in a crisis, as what happened with the pandemic. What does that reveal to us? And as you think more deeply and learn from those experiences, and hopefully beyond crisis times, what is it that stats producers can take from the lessons? And I think that the work that is coming from that exercise is hugely useful to definitely to official stats producers, but I think to many others as well, many other analysts, and for others to know that this kind of collaboration is really fruitful, bringing together experts from inside and outside of government with people with an expertise around analysis and statistics. Thinking about, it reinforced the point around thinking around the nature of the need for information, connecting with the purpose, what is needed, and what is the quality that is sufficient to meet those needs. Now, that is something that is an important lesson, not just in the kind of crisis times, not just in those pressure points, but actually reflecting on that and bringing that into your work in an evolving way. And the point that was actually being picked up, asking about dynamic and evolving, that sounds lovely. Is it realistic? How does that happen? Quality. I think it's a basic point that the code is trying to emphasize, that quality is not static, and that there can be an assumption from analysts and statisticians that they've kind of addressed quality issues by the way that maybe the methods being constructed, or the processes are organized, or the validation has been built in. And our point is that no, systems continue to change, the world continues to change. You need to be alert to the things that can go awry within the preparation and production of statistics. But the point about social change, that has come through in a number of the presentations this morning, and how important it is to be alert to that need for change and being responsive to it. Another key theme that I think has come from the presentations from Lisa's with Manchester Council, but also in the work that Rachel was talking around about involvement and engagement and the conversations that need to happen. The code absolutely has emphasized that through the various editions that it's had, but absolutely being strengthened in the 3rd edition of the code. I think the point about coming together, hearing each other, both potentially as maybe experts working with data, thinking about that primarily at this point, and what can you learn, and how can you have those users actually inputting into the development of statistics, improving those statistics. That is absolutely something that is critical, and I'm pleased to say that we are seeing that, and that is something to continue to grow. And the point about the feedback is so important, making sure that involvement, it doesn't end at just that activity, but is the feedback loop continues. You're really clear about what are the needs, what have you heard, what are you doing as a result, as a producer? How are you responding to that feedback? How are you making sure that you are being clear about what you can and can't do? Those are really important messages, making sure that the conversations are effective and productive and satisfying from both sides. But it's also something that reminds us, I think the Manchester experience is that things aren't necessarily fixed quickly. They can take an awful long while, and that actually can be very challenging issues. And to maintain that conversation can be challenging as well. But it is so important to do that. So please do persist with it. I think that is critical to ensure that official statistics keep improving. It also reinforced the importance, the clarity of messages around quality. That has come through for both expert and for more lay users, understanding what are the stats telling you, how can you use them, how can they be expressed clearly. Rachel sort of picked up on a number of those points in her feedback, and I love the point, the example that you gave, Rachel, the experience that you got, the conversations that you had is so incredibly important and central to what we're also looking for in Code 3, our latest edition of the code. Is really emphasizing this point about involvement and engagement, and that it is that point about how do you see yourself as a citizen expressed, shown in the numbers. How are they revealing you in the information? How can that information improve the decision making? So it's how it can we ensure that people have confidence to share their data. How can the data be making sure we ensure that the design is actually picking up people's lived experiences in appropriate ways? How can we be making sure that the statistics are being presented in ways that reflect those the variety of the population? All of those are really important questions, and one of the things that we've been doing as we've been developing the 3rd edition of the code is working with Connected by Data and developing some new guidance and a toolkit, thinking about public involvement and engagement, because of these conversations are incredibly important. And as we heard today, hearing them really help you be challenged in your thinking, and that's something that we want to see happen. And then trustworthiness, quality and value have come throughout each of these presentations. And I think Jessica's is really picking up an important point. A stats producer challenging the status quo is incredibly important. Seeing how should they change the way that they're doing something. Just to reiterate, with the pre-release access, that's actually set in legislation. That's actually not set within the code of practice. The powers of that are kept within parliaments, Scottish Parliament, the UK Parliament, Welsh Government. They retain the power for setting pre-release access rules. And the Act actually prevents the code from actually speaking about what those rules should be. But I think it's really important to see how these messages that we're sharing across all of these different presentations, reiterating the importance about integrity, behaving with the due diligence and caring for the user and the person whose information is being represented, and how to behave with that, I think is something that's critical in thinking around pre-release access as well. So in the final few moments, I'm not going to go, I've got a few slides. They'll be in the slide pack. I just wanted to pull out, make a couple of points around the 3rd edition of the code to really see how we're developing the code further. So very much still trustworthiness, quality and value, these key messages that you've been hearing about. Very much speaking to the official statistics producers with a set of standards that we have. We've try to focus those in areas of practice that really speak to our expectations of what it looks like to be producing statistics that actually do serve the public good. But we are also looking at the use of statistics within public bodies, and in bringing in, we have guidance within the Office for Stats Regulation that has been speaking to it can be to ministers, to leaders within organisations, the public bodies, to communications officials, around how are they using data and statistics and analysis, communicating key decisions. And these standards are being brought inside the code of practice to really speak to that wider use of data, statistics and the wider analysis. And also trying to encourage the way that the code of practice, the core principles of TQV, trustworthiness, quality and value, the 10 code principles that we've developed that come from that are all intended to help steer analysts inside and outside of government. The 10 standards for official stats all unpack these in important areas of practice, reinforcing our expectations. So what is next? We are working on the code. We've just about got a final version going to the authority board in the UK Statistics Authority. They are the body that has the responsibility in their legislation for making sure we have a code of practice. We're seeking to release the new edition of the code in October on the code website, and we'll be having some launch events in November. Very much looking to strengthen the code in many of the ways that have been talked about this morning, really trying to make sure that the code is directing producers, analysts in how to ensure that they actually are meeting people's needs for how to be reflected in the data, how to provide information that is exactly as Eliza was talking about in terms of being relevant, reliable and usable. All of that is incredibly important and reiterated within the code of practice. We do hope that you'll look at the code when it comes out, and please do let us know if you have any comments as we go forward. Some of you may be watching this, having the event being filmed and shared online, and if you want to get in touch, please do. But anybody who is hearing any of the presentations, if you have reflections that you'd like to share with OSR, please do come back to us, and we will be delighted to hear from you. Thank you, Dina. I'll hand back to you. Or rather, I won't hand back to you. I'll leave you to take over. Take control.
Yeah, I shall now sort of take control, as it were. Yes. So thank you very much, Penny, for your immediate thoughts on that. So that's the end of the presentation session, and then we're into the discussions. So just before we do that, just to say, right, just to make sure everyone knows that the slides are going to be posted, and the Q&A and the discussion that we're coming on to now on Stats User Network, and also those people have access to Future NHS Analyst X. We have a community page on there. If you have problem with that, or you have any further questions and comments, you can actually email webinar@hsug.org.uk. If you want to know how to get onto any of those, please do that. But I think that what we'd now do is probably move on to the Q&A, so effectively close down the presentation, and I would ask all the speakers to kind of come online. Right, so this is ending presentation for everybody, so hopefully we're just back to pictures of people. Good, great. Now, I mean, we don't, this is sort of kind of like turned into more of a kind of, you know, a kind of workshop session sharing between us, and then hopefully this is available for people afterwards. So we don't have our normal sort of set of questions to respond to, although the presentations raised all sorts of issues. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to start off with some maybe sort of questions back to you, and then maybe see if the speakers have got, because you all come from different perspectives, might have comments for some of the other speakers. I mean, there's a lot in here around where things are not working, in that people maybe not feeling they're getting their voices heard, not getting feedback. And I mean, I suppose the first question, and just in terms of thoughts, is that there's a whole lot of committed people around the table here, you know, and so this is all really good, and we've all kind of hopefully on the same page. But this needs to, one is that it needs to get to the producers to say, improve, listen to what are these messages. And then the other is to actually pick up on the users. So, I mean, I think I'd just sort of, I mean, it's partly Penny, but whether others have got thoughts on how can we get not just the committed people who are interested in talking to users, how do we actually get the producers on board to actually follow what it's said in the code? Because then I said to Penny when we started, is any of this because it's not in the code, or is it because people aren't complying with the code? And that is there a role for users and the user community to kind of make sure that those producers are actually following what they do? So I just kind of go round the table to say, I mean, Deniz, from your discussions there, how do you see the producers generally, people who are producing statistics, taking on board the ideas, taking on board the comments and understanding, and actually does having something in the code help with that?
That's a good point. I was just thinking about what you were talking about the kind of users' role in all of this, because I guess we were kind of thinking about each aspect individually in the audience, but I guess thinking about the case studies and the aim there to kind of spread awareness. I think a lot of that is because people might not kind of realize how many trade-offs do need to be made in real world situations. You might think, oh, you know, why can't you spend a bit more time on this, improve it more in this way? But I think just really bringing to light the kind of real world constraints that are necessary should hopefully be helpful in that aspect from this point of view. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes, and maybe I'll just over to Elisa and saying, I mean, because you had a lot of challenges in that one, is that it's sort of saying that are there things there that you'd be hoping the code would help you, or that's not in the code that would help address your problems, which seem to be that, you know, in some instances you're not being heard, the local perspective is not being taken into account. So is there something that you see that needs to be in the code that's not there, or something around people not complying with the code? Is that a tool that helps you address some of those challenges that you've raised?
Yes, I think it is. I think ONS and the council have worked very closely, particularly in the last couple of years with the census results, in trying to come to a common understanding about our residents. Happy to be told that we're wrong. Not so sure how happy ONS are happy to be told that they're wrong. they are definitely engaging and they're definitely listening to our concerns. What we don't get is the so what happened next. We hear back from them about their findings, but we don't know whether, say, where we've actually evidenced that there are missing people and missing households in the census, did that actually go anywhere? Did it inform a revision? No, it didn't. But did it feed through into their mid-year estimates? Did it feed through into the projections that come off those mid-year estimates? There's been quite an uplift in our migration in our estimates since then, but that's a national thing. But I don't know within that whether there's some revision in there. And what I'm getting at is the transparency of what they do next, and also the feedback to us about whether, yes, we heard what you said, but we're ignoring it. Yes, we heard what you said, and we've gone and done this as a result of that. Yes, we've heard what you've said, and we're going to revise as a result of that. What we tend to hear is, as a result of it, is we can't just do that for you. You've got to appreciate that if we make a methodological change, that's got to affect everybody, which is fine. Manchester represents, in our view, an outlier in a generic methodology that is being used by ONS for things. We're not on our own. There are other core cities and London boroughs that have been shouting about the same thing for many years. And I know there is general frustration amongst all of those people. But it's how much ONS's hands are tied in that respect. But we have to justify giving up our time where we've been working with ONS. I'm producing, looking for evidence. I'm doing analysis. I'm preparing reports. We're having meetings, and then we're coming back with them sending us reports about what their findings are. But that takes a lot of time, and I've got to justify that time. And certainly with things like the census, we got to a point where our senior leaders are sort of, well, it was 2021, let's get over it now. It was a snapshot done during an epidemic, so let's park it there, not understanding that those figures are influencing the estimates and projections now and for our future. We're starting at too low a baseline in those figures. And they don't understand that. Why would they understand that? But it has real consequences on the amount of resources and finance that we're going to get now and in the future for things. So it's just the feedback, really, so we can go to senior leaders and say, we've put forward our proposals, this is where we're up to, and this is what ONS are doing about it, or whoever it is.
Yeah, I mean, that general feeling of not hearing back as to what's happened and why it's happened, I hear time and again, because I'm involved with the Forum of Statistics user groups as well as with Health Stats user group. And that comes up again and again. And as people making the effort to contribute, and usually quite a lot of work to put comments in, and then if you get nothing back, then it's, you know, even it's just an explanation about why that you know, it's that sort of balance of things, like, you know, Deniz's thing, you know, where, you know, what's a compromise. If you don't get anything back, then people get very dispirited and don't want to contribute again. So I think that's a general issue. So Rachel, you wanted to come in on this, because I think
yeah, so one of my roles used to be writing responses to NICE consultations for National Childbirth Trust, which actually I really enjoyed doing, and gathering the feedback from all different members and putting it into some sort of form. And actually one of the most useful things I got out of that exercise was that NICE, they give you a really comprehensive, you know, there's all the comments are listed with their response, you know, and whether they're going to action it, whether it's out of scope, you know, whether they can take it on board or not. That was really useful to me as a person writing that feedback, to see how it was being received, how it was being taken on board, what had been useful and what hadn't. So I think that's, so for a consultation exercise, that's a model which could do with adopted more widely, I feel.
Yes, I mean that's good to have that as a sort of a good practice model, you know, that people could follow. But I mean, one of the frustrations is that you have a good practice thing and no one else then follows it. I mean, Penny, can I just get your sort of thoughts on this particular sort of issue in terms of not getting feedback, not getting the explanations, and then, you know, why do we bother to contribute with these discussions?
Well, we completely agree with the point that should be done. It is in the code now. It's not that it's not in the code. It definitely is in the code. So I think in that sense, it's reflecting the official stats producers not providing sufficient information or coming back specifically enough to people who have contributed. So I think that's absolutely something that is for the system to look at and think about. There is stuff that's being done around engagement that is being led by kind of heads of profession, the senior leaders on statistics and across the departments. They've been doing some work around strategy and engagement and are trying to improve their approach. We welcome that, but it's actually taken quite a long while to get to that bit. So I would say that you're right to want it, to want the information, to want the feedback. In terms of the specific one around ONS, that, I mean, this is something that we have raised within the work that we have done with them. So we definitely recognise it from the specific cases that Elisa has talked about in relation to population as well. So it's not new to hear it. I think the challenge is actually is influencing the behaviours and shifting it. I do hope that I was kind of mentioning in my brief presentation around the toolkit that we've been developing with Connected by Data on public involvement and engagement. That's one part of it. In a sense, that's picking up more maybe on Rachel's area around the wider community groups and members of, you know, citizens being able to be involved and speak into. I think that the expert groups, Elisa's area in terms of, you know, expert users of data and their particular needs, in a sense, is a slightly set of different approaches that are used in and they're positive examples of I think even some of the ones that you've been involved in, Elisa, and your colleagues, in terms of working with not just ONS, but for Scotland, certainly in the way NRS was able to engage with organisations, local councils, for example, in their testing of census data. These are good examples of practice, but the worry is that whole point about not getting the feedback clearly enough, sufficiently enough to know what's happened as a result of it is yeah, definitely a message we can take away and trying to be re-emphasizing in the guidance that we're given. Just to say in code 3, what we're doing in terms of guidance, I love the nice example. I think not just the one that you were just mentioning, Rachel, which is a really interesting one, but the other one that you talked about in your presentation as well. But also, Deniz, in the ones that you've got with the case studies that you highlight. Within code 3, we're having a kind of a guidance catalogue that is related to each of the standards within the standards for official statistics, as well as the other parts of the code. But they are, in a sense, they're focusing on particular areas of practice, and it gives us a good platform for each of them, kind of like mini landing pages to try and direct people to useful resources and guidance and examples. So I've absolutely made a note to double check that I've got your case studies highlighted, and of course, as you get more and as you get more specific, you know, as your group goes further, they are absolutely things that we can be trying to emphasize to stats producers. I love the nice one though. I'm definitely going to be looking at the example that you gave, Rachel, and try and make sure. I think the points around presentation and language are really good ones that we can you know, bring into kind of people who are using producing official statistics and more widely. So kind of I've gone off the point there a bit, Dina, but I thought each of those are really important things around what I'm hearing in terms of engagement and how to try and do something about it, how to raise the awareness of it, and how to bring in the things that you're each picking up. We are seeking to try and do that. If you forgive me, because this is quite a small group, if I can pick up on something that was said sorry, Dina, I'm taking you off your questions, but there was a point about accountability that was raised.
I was just going to come to accountability, actually, but I'm glad you picked that up. Yeah,
read your mind then. Well, it was just, what I meant to say and I didn't say. Rachel, you asked the question about where can somebody go? Well, you can come to the Office for Stats Regulation. So we are the regulator for statistics. For official statistics is our legal mandate. So certainly all the conversation where it's been talking about official statistics, you know, we are an organisation you can come to. We want, though, in Code 3, one of the things that we're really trying to emphasise in accountability is for stats producers to see themselves as being accountable, and to be, that being the starting point, is that they're accountable to their users being, you know, you and beyond, you know, the range of different types of groups that you're representing, and that they have to take that perspective rather than coming in and focusing from focusing on the data and focusing on the task of producing the stats and how to present and do the task, actually about the receipt of that information, thinking about the audiences of it and how do they make sense of it and how do they demonstrate that they are being heard, how they are responding, and it not just being pushing information out and just leaving it out there, but actually then seeing that they need to be accountable means listening and being responsive. In some ways, it's part of it anyway. And I think hearing it is only part of the communication. It's the start of a communication, and it's the follow-on is part of the issue that you were just talking about, Eliza. That it's okay to have one conversation, but it's a dialogue. It's actually a series of things that need to be exchanged. And where do you go with it, and what can happen? And for the user, or, you know, the citizen, the person who is wanting to say, hold on, this is broken, this isn't working for me, I'm not being heard, or my experience is not being reflected. If you can't go to the producer and have satisfaction, you can come to us. So we are not just, in a sense, we are a resource for you as well, and that those issues can be raised, you know, with us. And there's a way through our website where people can raise concerns. You don't have to know the person within the Office for Stats Regulation. You can just go to the raise a concern and post a message there, and it can be followed through. For those of you who are expert users and maybe working in and helping the Office for Stats Regulation in its assessments or compliance reviews, you may well have come into contact with some of my colleagues. So for your area in relation to Population and Society is our domain group, and you're absolutely welcome to go and contact them at any point as well. So please know that we try not to be faceless, but we want to be open to anybody. So that raise a concern is quite helpful for anybody just finding us. But if you know someone within OSR, you're very welcome to go direct to them as well. But I think the point about accountability, just to finally say, give the platform back to you, Dina. We've done, in a sense, we're trying to do our own TQV, and listening to, actually it was, I think, probably our first session, roundtable session, talking about the code. We had a really good suggestion from one of the members of the roundtable that we organised jointly with the RSS, and he came up with this reflection, what he thought about accountability. We thought it was brilliant, and we've actually taken it and used it, adapted it for our language and to fit in with the code. And we've got that as guidance on accountability. We've tried to reinforce the messages that are in that guidance with specific practices that are in the standards for official stats. So that part of the code, to really reinforce this point around our expectation on producers that they act on this. And it's not just an ideal, that it is something to be delivered to.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important, very helpful. I suppose one thing might be around, and I'd be interested in everyone's thoughts on that, actually, in terms of how you present the code of practice. I mean, I think if you say code of practice, this sounds terribly bureaucratic, and it's this, you know, there's a tome that, you know, in the old days would sit on the shelf somewhere. So, you know, you're not going to get your average person out there, user, even a professional user, who's going to get really enthused about the code of practice, really. Sorry, Penny, I know it's, you know, you're sort of, but you know,
no, I agree with you. I agree with you.
But whether or not there's something around what you can expect you know, in terms of summarising how you present it, there's the full detailed one, but a kind of user-friendly summary, which is, okay, what if you're a user, even a lay user or an expert lay user, so what can you expect from the data that's coming out? And then what do you do if you don't think you're getting that? Where do you go? And then that gives the user the opportunity to say, I don't think it's reflecting me, or I don't think it matches up to what I see on the ground. It's then they feel that they can say something, and there's somewhere that they can go to say something. Now, maybe that's being a bit too idealistic, but somehow it's presenting it in a way that these are the things you should look for. And I, you know, I've just, you know, not a slide which is all the pillars and stuff like that, which is, you know, when you talk, you know, to someone in the pub, I mean, actually getting out there and having discussions with people in your circles or in the pub or in other groups, and then you find out what they're really saying, what they're really thinking is, okay, how do you actually present what you should expect from data to that general audience in a way that makes sense to them? So, I mean, that's a sort of a question. I don't know, Rachel, would you want to sort of comment on how you think we could make it more real?
Yeah, it is an interesting point. The thing I'm thinking of is one of the first data intensive studies I was involved with, and we had a PPI group. We were asking for their input on our research question, and we found that they were bringing up really interesting points about the health issue, but they weren't ones that we could answer with the methodology. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we had to keep saying, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. So then we decided to do some training sessions on the, you know, the limitations of data sets and how we use them. And it very quickly became apparent that you couldn't get them interested in the methodology, but you could get them interested in an issue. And then if you'd found the issue they were interested in, then you could talk about, you could share information with them about how your question, how you know, data research using stats could help them to get the answers, or some answers that would help them locally, because they were all members of Maternity Voices Partnership, so these co-production groups around the country. Is this making sense? So yeah, so what we ended up doing were sort of developing resources for them on the questions they were interested in, and then we were having more general discussions kind of along the way about methodology, which really helped the data analyst. You know, she said she could see what their, you know, as she was building her models and so on and working things out, she knew what they were concerned about, which were things like, you know, ethnicity coding came up as a big thing, but there were some other questions as well. She knew how they responded to data and how they responded to talking further about data, because she'd been able to get them interested on these different topics, even though they weren't necessarily the research question, if that makes sense. So that's how we've continued doing it to some extent with other projects, not in quite the same amount of depth, but you know, we've had to have the discussion of, yeah, let's find the question that you're interested in, and then we can talk about this methodology, and then we can get back to our research question, which is a bit long-winded, but it's very rich, it's very informative, it's really interesting. It's why I like, you know, doing data research, because these immensely interesting discussions about how, you know, data helps us conceptualize the world, or how it isn't helping with those conceptions, and, you know, what's a model citizen, how do we, you know, who's showing up in the data, what are all the things that people are doing that isn't showing up in the data. For example, you know, one of the questions raised on that discussion group was about miscarriage, and, you know, well, where's the data about miscarriage, which is hugely important to women, but it's not in any data sets, because you barely even go to your GP with a miscarriage, you know, especially early miscarriage, you just don't talk about it. So it was, yeah, how can we answer things? What's there? What's not there? How do we show up in data? What's the form of us in data? Is an interesting way to sort of approach that. Does that answer your question, Deanna?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed to be like being in their space and coming from that perspective, not coming from top down. Does any other thoughts and you know, because I mean, in terms of that way forward from anyone else around the table? I mean, obviously, if anyone else wants to kind of comment on that in terms of how we take this forward, how does the users get involved? Yes, Elisa.
I think one practical approach may be to have OSR's contact details and purpose embedded into the data providers' own websites, where the data is actually being sourced from, so that not in your face, but somewhere, so that if somebody's looking at something and thinks, I'm fed up with this not being right, or that doesn't answer what I need, that they know where to go to get that challenge and that confidence to challenge, because you're right, you do come across as sort of very highbrow, bureaucratic, not to be touched, and unless you've got some serious legal concern, or so to get that sort of we're not there just for court cases or whatever. We're here for the needs of people, and make you a bit more accessible that way.
Yeah, we definitely recognise that as well. That was something that we have tried to get producers to include a line where we talk about the kind of the status of the statistics, about being official stats, what does that mean, and accredited official stats, what does that mean? We got them to include a line, but I think very often it's right at the very bottom of the page that says that they're regulated by the Office for Stats Regulation, and that we encourage them to, if anybody does have a problem, to actually contact the producer, and if they have no joy, to come to us and have a link to ours. But I think that's the trouble with that, the kind of message that we've got at the moment. It's not really succeeded, probably because it's quite buried. Because you can have if you've got a stats release, it could be somewhere at the very, very bottom, and you might never come across it. So I think that's a good challenge for us, a good reminder of the value of something like that. So and I think also what Dina was saying as well, when you spoke before, and you mentioned around and a user-friendly summary of the code and what users can expect. We have developed some sort of easy read versions of what we're producing, but I think you actually framed it in a really good way that I'm definitely taking away, and we'll be looking at how we are pitching what we've got to provide a reminder, just a signpost that that people can come to us if they actually do have those frustrations that clearly some of you have experienced in working with official stats. So they're all great points, and I think, Rachel, your description of the working with kind of citizens involved in research and how to shape the research, I think that all of that area of development has been quite inspiring for us, and we're looking to see how we can bring that into official statistics, and kind of learning from some of the panels that exist around shaping research, like SAIL and places like that. And I hope that what I can do is to share with you the toolkit that it's not published yet, but it'll be great to get your input and your thoughts on the public involvement engagement toolkit. And it is trying to do the thing that you were describing. It's trying to help official stats producers to see the value of those kinds of conversations, and way to come alongside and trying to hear what people are thinking about data, and about what are the issues, particularly around sensitive data, how they can see themselves in it, and what does it mean for them in terms of how to collect the information, but also, really importantly, how to be represented in the figures too. So if you don't mind, and anybody else who's interested in seeing it, really happy to share it, to get your input on it. It's something that we are sharing it with some others as well. We had the workshop that took part, it was quite a wide-ranging group of people that were involved in it. We're developing it as we go forward. Hopefully it will be ready by the time that we launch the third edition of the code in October. So there's still plenty of time for you to, if you're just about to go on holiday, please don't panic about having to reply or anything really quickly or anything like that. So if that's okay, and as this is a video, if anybody's made it to 2 hours 24 minutes into the video, you're welcome to email us too if you'd like to have a copy of it. So let us know your details.
No, just to say it's great to hear that, Penny. And I have to say, I'd never heard of OSR. I talk to people about ONS all the time.
Yeah, well
I've never heard of OSR.
There are thousands of them, and there are 50 of us.
Yeah,
we're not equally sized, even though we're two parts of the Stats Authority. They're ginormous and we're tiny. But we cover the whole of the UK in terms of stats regulation. You know, ONS happens to be the executive arm for producing stats for the Stats Authority, but we're separate from them in terms of the way that we function, and we are the regulator across the whole of the UK, as I say.
So that's very important. So yeah, can I just, sorry, Jessica, I didn't come back to you because actually this has gone off, probably not in pre-release access issues, but have you any sort of thoughts or comments? I mean, you know, you've worked in other areas and in this aspect, so any thoughts, particularly from the sort of the Scottish perspective in terms of what we've been talking about?
So I have to confess that most of my work is far more qualitative, and so I don't deal with the statistics nearly as much. But you know, the public engagement as part of our work is something that we do or try to do throughout a lot of our work. And Rachel, your stuff around like maternity health sounds really, really, really interesting. But yeah, no, these are all, I think, struggles that we have in how to engage people meaningfully in shaping our research as well. So I think it's a common experience for us too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of issue about how do we actually get, you know, get views from the users, but professional users and the sort of expert lay users and the general public. And I mean, that's sort of quite challenging. I mean, I'm sort of thinking about there's a couple of consultations out at the moment about public health statistics, all really, really important. And I think they're getting almost no responses, but it's a survey going around. Everyone's really busy. It's the summer, there's all sort of stuff, and people are not going to sit down and respond to a survey. So actually there needs to be another way of picking up from people in their space at the time that works for them. And I think that's a sort of an issue, which I'm not quite sure how you encapsulate that in the code of practice, but there's something around not just listening, you know, not just asking questions, but, you know, listening to people in the way when they want to talk to you.
Absolutely.
I think that's something really important, which doesn't seem to kind of get across. We talk about it, and then we get yet another survey, and you go, no, please, no.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important point. I mean, I think on the producer side, I think equally for them, it's massively challenging to the time that it takes to actually carry out some of the engagement work is very resource intensive. And that's where I kind of come back to the sense in which they need to be strategic in the way that they do it. And I think, in a sense, it actually is a really productive question to be asking, Dina, that you have around how can users get involved, but how can they get involved with producers in a way that is effective for producers, effective for users, and a good use of everybody's time, and a way of actually coming together in a meaningful way. I think that's a challenge on both sides, because equally producers have very little time and resource, and that resource is getting less all the time. So the risk for engagement could actually increase in terms of actually being even more limited. We need to fight that. We need to find ways of actually making it happen in a way that is constructive and effective. So I think one of the things that I'll take from here is to actually get in touch with the deputy heads of the government stats service, who are particularly interested and leading around the strategy for the GSS, and kind of coordinating with the heads of profession for stats that are leading different topic areas that are focused on user engagement, because I think they need to work effectively together with users, because I think you could end up having 6 conversations with different organizations all involved in, you know, some part of health, which is not a good use of a lot of individuals' times. So I'll contact them and let them know. So when this comes out, hopefully I'll be able to share the thing with the link with them, but also just the message that you've been sharing with them about how to try and think about doing this. And it might be that they've got thoughts that we can feed back to this group as well.
And I mean, thinking in terms of obviously resources, I mean, resources are very stretched, but actually, you know, they don't have to all do it on themselves. I mean, what's been talked about today, I mean, all the, you know, what Elisa's doing and what she knows and with her colleagues, I mean, that's a lot of work there done, tremendous resource that actually, if you see that as something that you can draw on,
absolutely.
I mean, she shouldn't be pushing at people. They should be coming and asking her, saying, I need to know about this. And you've kind of done it for me. And the same thing, like we work, Rachel, Jessica, Deniz have all done things which actually then that need to be taken into account. So
well, I'm pleased to say, Dina, that the practice that we actually have on this actually does talk about consider the evidence. So the evidence isn't necessarily about them all having to go out and actually do all the research themselves. It is exactly your point. Look out there. What is out there? What can tell you now that right at this point, what evidence is there that helps you make the right kind of call? So completely agree with you. You're spot on.
Yeah, great. So I mean, we'll continue the discussion because there's a lot of things we want to take forward. We want this not to stop here. We want this to be something that makes a difference. And you know, we want to take this forward. I mean, it's quite on the last kind of, you know, 5 minutes. I just wanted to, is there any other sort of final comments that any of the speakers or anyone still online wants to make about what's been said or how we take this forward? Anything else we want to pick up on? We will be attempting. Richard has been manfully trying to take a note of this extreme sort of discussion backwards and forwards, and he will then write this up and send it out to everyone to say, you know, have we captured this correctly? And we will be promoting this discussion through our various channels on the RSS, on AnalystX and Stats User Network. And there are some where I think we will take forward to the wider forum of statistics user groups, because although we're talking about health and care here, many of the things we're talking about are relevant to many areas of statistics. So, you know, and Georgia in the official stats in RSS, I mean, it cuts across a lot of areas, doesn't it? So I don't know, George, whether you wanted to actually make some final comments on this.
Just to say, I found the whole webinar fascinating, if I'm honest, especially, for example, when it comes to the code of practice. Have been previously leading teams who were focusing primarily on publications, and we're talking about like a number of them, like publications in one go. So it was really important to have everything like in one place, so that we can make sure that it's streamlined, like the process we are using. There is trustworthiness there, the accountability, as mentioned previously, accuracy, of course, which is another very important thing. So yes, I think this kind of, you know, cross-cuts pretty much everything that we do as statisticians, right? So this is very important. So I guess these are just a few comments that I had, but yes, it was excellent to see the talk. So yes, really great.
Great. Well, thank you, George, and that's thank you to the RSS official stats for helping to host this. So I think it's probably now we're more or less out of time, and we've run for the whole 2 hours rather than, because there was so much we thought to discuss rather than rush through in an hour and a half. So thank you very much to all the speakers for all your contributions. And we will be, as I say, writing this up, posting this and disseminating this more widely. And hopefully this will be taken forward in further discussions, because there's some really important issues we really hope will be addressed. So with that, I will say thank you. Enjoy your rest of the day and the weekend. And we will be in touch by email afterwards. So safe journey for the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.
Bye. Bye.